Hey everybody, welcome back. We're in chapter 4. I'm trying a different microphone since the last one seems to have been making some glitches. So hopefully this one is somewhat better. Okay, what we're looking at here is chapter 4, recognizing objects. I was hoping my picture might catch your attention and make you think, what is that? What is it? I found this on the internet, and people were trying to figure out what they had found in the park. And they said the texture felt squishy, like it was biological. It was really gross looking. It smelled bad. They just described it on the internet, and people took guesses. Until finally somebody suggested it looks like a really mangled, deflated dog toy, like you found it at a park. Probably what you're smelling is, congealed dog spit and other kinds of, biological things, but that it's made out of this squishy silicone kind of resistant material. But let's be honest, a dog can pop it, and then you end up with this inside out, gross looking thing. The fact that a person found it and wanted to know what it was, and that other people on the internet wanted to help them figure it out, shows what a powerful motive it is for us to recognize objects. We want to know what things are so that we can correctly classify them. And there are a lot of different things that we are worried about when we're classifying objects. Is it safe? Is it dangerous? Is it friend or foe? Is it fun? Is it, we want to figure out what the object is. And for some of us, we might even just want to know because we want to know, not even because it has any meaningful, impact on our lives. It might just be because we're curious. We want to know. A lot of people have a really high need for cognition and just really want to know things. So what is it is a common thing that we think about. So in today's, or this chapter's lecture, what we're going to be covering across these recordings is, some early considerations about recognition, just some basic facts, some basic things, maybe some early theories. We're going to talk specifically about face recognition, because those are very special objects to be recognizing, and also word recognition, another very special kind of object to be recognizing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the feature net, and then some of how the feature net has grown and developed over time as far as a theoretical concept. And then we're going to talk about some top-down influences on object recognition. So these are our topics for this chapter. All right. So pattern recognition. What is the function of recognizing patterns or objects out in the world? For one, it's to make sense of stimulation. We want to know what that is activating our eyes or our nose or our ears or our tongue, right, like our taste buds or our sense of touch. We want to know, what is that? We want to be able to impose meaning on that incoming information. So this is really very much a top-down process, isn't it? Because we want to figure out what that is so that now we understand what's going on. We can now impose some perception onto the sensations that are coming in through our sense organs. So it's a really important function, right? So information out in the world, it lands in our sensory register, which is another way of saying in our eyes or our ears or our nose or our tongue or our sense receptors on our skin. And ultimately, what we want to have happen is we can recognize that pattern. I think that's one of the things that made that dog toy such a hot chat on the internet, was because people couldn't recognize the pattern. And people were throwing ideas out there like, well, maybe it's a sea anemone. And it's like, we weren't near the sea. Plus, a sea anemone would be dehydrated. It wouldn't look like that anymore. And so, people were trying to guess and trying to figure it out. And nothing that was being offered really accounted for the pattern that was being detected. So it's frustrating when that happens. We want to know what that object is. There's a TV show on, and maybe you can catch it on some kind of streaming if you don't have TV anymore, but it is called The Proof Is Out There. The Proof Is Out There. And they show videos of different unexplained phenomena that, at least for the person with the camera, they're recording something and saying, what is that? A lot of times it's something up in the sky, and they think maybe they've captured a alien craft. Sometimes it's a Bigfoot sighting. I just saw one the other day where they were saying that maybe they had captured video footage of a animal that was thought to have gone extinct in Tasmania in 1982. And they're like, maybe that's what this is. What they're hoping is that, if they put their video out, other people can look at it and give an explanation, tell us what that pattern is, so we can stop worrying about it, right? Sometimes we're dissatisfied with the label that they give us, and they say, oh, that's not that extinct animal, it's some other known animal that we know it's not extinct, you just, it's grainy footage, so you just think it's the extinct animal. And sometimes that's frustrating, we don't want to hear that. But we do want closure. When we have input into our sensory register, we would like to know what it actually is. So one theory is that when information comes in, what we're trying to do is match this incoming information to our long-term memories. We're going to be getting deeper into long-term memory store later, so I'll just talk about it sort of in a glossing way without like deep terminology yet. But what we're arguing here is that as information comes in, we compare it to things we already know, things that we've experienced before. Now that's a really good statistical strategy because new information coming in more than likely is related or of the same sort as things that we've experienced in the past. A completely new and novel experience is unusual. And so it makes a lot of sense to just assume that it's something that we already know about. It's something that we've experienced before in our lives. And so when we do pattern recognition, as information comes in through our sense organs, we're sort of filing through memories of all the things that we've ever experienced that are sort of like this one. That phrase, sort of like this one, is a really important phrase in cognitive psychology. It explains what we call hedges. Hedges are when we don't know exactly how to describe what we're experiencing. We don't know exactly what pattern it matches, but we want to try and explain it to someone else. And we want to say, it's sort of like this other thing that you can relate to or that I've experienced before that I can describe better. So those kinds of hedges are really important in pattern recognition. So how do we accomplish pattern recognition? Okay, there's two main theories that I'm going to address that were first offered to explain how we accomplish the task of pattern recognition. The first one is template theory, and it's the older theory. It says that we actually have literal copies of our experiences stored in our long-term memory. So you have a template in your stored memory of what it means to go to a sit-down restaurant where you order off of a menu. You have a literal template for what it means to see a shooting star. You have a literal template of how a book's plot should progress, right? You have these templates in your head of the world. And you keep these literal copies in your mind, in your memory, so that when a new pattern comes in, you have to search through the templates that are already in your memory to try and find a match for that new pattern. If there's a match, then you're going to say, oh, I know what that is. I recognize that. This is just like something I've experienced before, or it is, in fact, the same thing I've experienced before. Problem with this theory, one of the reasons why it fell out of favor pretty quickly is because imagine how much time it would take to actually do a comprehensive search of all the templates you have stored in your memory. Even by the age of, some of you might be as young as 16 maybe who are sitting in this class right now and you're like, well, I'm relatively young. How many templates can I have accumulated in my lifetime? Well, probably a lot. You probably have a lot of templates in your brain. And, imagine your parents probably have twice as many and your grandparents probably have 3 times as many. There are a lot of templates probably stored in your memories. And so the idea that you would comprehensively search them all in order to find whether there is a match doesn't make a ton of sense because it just seems too time consuming. Now, this is what a computer does. If you do a Google image search, it's exactly what it does. It searches the internet for other things that match it. The other day, my mom and I were working on compiling a photo album of anybody who's in the family that is stored in her Google Photos drive. And so it's really convenient. It gives you all these like thumbnail pictures of everybody, and you can click on anybody who you want included in the album. And initially, it populated with like 15 pictures of probably really good straight-on pictures of us that matched the thumbnail really well. The next day we came back and there were hundreds of pictures populated in that album. And we were like, I think we might have made a mistake. This is too many pictures. I'm not sorting through them. But it took a little while, right? And immediately it found the ones that were probably the most obvious matches. And then over the next 24 hours or however long it took it to do it, it found ones that were maybe a little bit, off angle, or maybe from the top, or wearing different clothes, or your hairstyle's different, or you've got facial hair now. It had to sort through all those and make the judgment, template or not template, right? Does it match or does it not match? So imagine if you had to do that every time you saw a person. Let's say you haven't seen Uncle Fred in a while, and he shows up this next time you see him, and he's wearing a beard. And you'd have to sit there and search through every person you've ever met that's ever had a beard, or who has that color eyes, or who has ever been associated with Aunt Francine, or whatever, right? You're going to have to go through all these templates to try and figure out who this person might be. And that's not how you recognize people. That's, people can change their hair, people can get their braces off, people can grow facial hair, and you still recognize them, usually without a beat. In fact, you recognize them so well you can't quite figure out what's different. If they've dyed their hair a different color, or something pretty dramatic that might trip up something like Google Photos, but for you, you recognize it really quickly, and you don't have to really think about it. So something else must be going on. Here's another example of how time-consuming it can be. Now that we have APHIS, which is where they have a national database of all the fingerprints ever collected, and then if you have fingerprints of, from a crime scene or something, and you send it in, that fingerprint has to be compared to every single fingerprint in the system, right? And it has to look for all these factors. This is going to take some time, and it does. It takes days for the fingerprints to be identified. This is different from you putting your finger on your own phone or on your own computer to open it up. It recognizes it instantly, and that's because it only knows one finger. It only knows one thing. I'm feeling pretty excited because I got a new phone, and it can recognize multiple fingers. So I could put my thumb on it, or I could put my pointer finger on it. So it actually can recognize two fingerprint patterns, but it has to be on there really well, because it tells me it doesn't recognize my fingerprint a lot. It tells me it's not getting it, because it has to match really well. But that's why a phone can do it, or, for example, they've talked about using your fingerprint at the bank. Instead of you signing something, you could just put your finger on it. The reason why that would work in a timely fashion is because there's a limited number of fingerprints that it's being compared to. Whereas, when you have the entire system of anybody who's ever been fingerprinted, and all the fingerprints are in there, and this new fingerprint has to be compared to all of them, it can take a really long time. So I'm going to argue that probably the template search doesn't make a ton of sense. I'm going to make one more case for it, which is that patterns of like stimuli occur in many forms. So things that are very similar to each other. Let's say a flower takes many forms. There's lots of different ways a flower can appear, and yet you recognize all versions of it pretty quickly as a flower. There are certain flowers that really don't look very flower-like, and you might think to yourself, I don't know what that is, because it doesn't match your template of a flower very well, or your prototype of a flower very well. But in general, if it's colorful, if it's on a plant with green leaves, if it's in a garden, right, these factors help you to narrow down that it's probably a flower, even if it's not a very stereotypical flower. Patterns of like stimuli can occur in many forms, and you still recognize them. The one I was taught when I was in grad school is glasses, right, like drinking glasses. These vary in a lot of different ways, right? Some of them have a stem underneath them, like a wine glass or a margarita glass. Some of them have handles on the side, like a cup that you would actually maybe drink something hot out of instead of something cold. Or I guess a beer stein, not something cold, right? So maybe sometimes you want it so cold you freeze it, right? Some of them are designed more to hold like a shot of whiskey. Some of them are designed more to drink water out of. There's different kinds of glasses, and even on this picture there's a pitcher, right, that you could get a pitcher of beer or a pitcher of tea or a pitcher of root beer in it, something like that. All of these, though, you could use a single word to describe all the members of this entire long list, right? You could just say that's a glass. It might be a wine glass. It might be a whiskey shot. It might be a beer stein. It might have a specific name after that, but you could use the word glass to describe all of these things. And at least in English. I don't know if other languages have such one generic term for this particular object, but other languages do have a generic term for a whole class of objects, And the objects might have specific names under that, but you could call it just a glass, like in this case. So the fact that you can get multiple things that look vastly different from each other and recognize it as a member of this larger category and just call it by that name really shows you that it would be difficult. I mean, imagine if you had to search your template to find a word for each one of these individual objects before you could recognize it. It would be crippling. You wouldn't be able to do anything else. So the template theory has some really good, smart components to it. You know, the idea that, you know, you probably do have to search through what you already know in order to recognize what's coming in, that makes a lot of sense. But the idea that you have literal templates, that probably is not true. All right, let's go ahead and take a little break here, and I'm going to come back and talk about pre-processing in the next video.